All right, today we're going to jump back in time, way back to 1956. We're going to break down a law that you've probably never heard of, but trust me, it quietly shapes the food that ends up on our tables even now. It's the Livestock and Poultry Feeds Act.
I mean, think about it for a second. It's a pretty fundamental question, right? The quality of our meat, our milk, our eggs, it all starts with what the animals themselves are eating. It's the very foundation of the food chain.
So let's set the scene. It's the post-war era, agriculture is getting more and more industrialized, and people are starting to wonder, hey, what are we actually putting in our food? Lawmakers in the Philippines decided to get ahead of the problem. They put together this foundational rulebook to bring some safety and honesty to the animal feed industry.
Okay, so let's crack open this rulebook. Officially, it's called Republic Act 1556, and it's the legal framework we're going to dive into right now. First things first, what exactly counts as feed? Well, the law defines it as any processed substance meant to provide nutrition. But what's really interesting is what it doesn't include. Simple, raw stuff like unmixed whole grains or fresh grass. The focus here was clearly on the manufactured mixed-up products.
So if you've got rules, you need a referee, right? The Act puts that job squarely on the shoulders of the Secretary of Agriculture, working through the Bureau of Animal Industry. These two became the top watchdogs for feed quality in the country.
Now we get to the absolute heart of this law, the one thing that underpins everything else, the registration requirement. This was the first and most important hurdle for anyone in the feed business.
And the rule was totally black and white. It didn't matter if you were a huge manufacturer or a small-town distributor. If you touched animal feed for business, you had to be on the official government list. No ifs, ands, or buts.
The process itself was designed to be pretty straightforward. It was a simple three-step path. You apply to the Bureau of Animal Industry, you pay your fee, and you get your official registration. The whole idea was to create a paper trail for every single player in the game.
And what about those fees? This gives us a really fascinating peek into the 1956 economy. A retailer paid just 5 pesos a year, but a big-time manufacturer, that was 300 pesos. Now, to put that in perspective, the daily minimum wage back then was about 4 pesos. So that 300 peso fee was like paying a worker for 75 full days. That was a serious cost of doing business.
And this quote from the law shows you just how crucial that registration was. It's an absolute statement. If your feed isn't registered, it's illegal. You can't make it, you can't sell it, you can't even advertise it. It's a total ban.
Okay, so once a product is legally registered, what's next? Well, now it's all about transparency for the buyer. So let's talk about something we're all very familiar with today, reading the label.
Honestly, this is the perfect way to think about it. The law basically created a nutrition facts panel for animal feed. It required a clear, honest, and detailed label on every single bag so that farmers knew exactly what they were getting.
The basic requirements were pretty intuitive. Every label had to show the weight, the brand, who made it and where, its official registration number, and the date it was made. This was all about basic identity and traceability.
But it went much deeper than that. The law demanded what it called a guaranteed analysis. This meant the manufacturer had to legally promise the minimum amounts of good stuff, like protein and fat, and the maximum amounts of other things, like fiber and moisture. It was basically a scientific contract printed right on the bag. Now, having rules and labels is one thing, but how do you make sure everybody's actually playing fair? Well, that's where enforcement comes in. Let's call them the feed police.
The law gave government inspectors some pretty serious authority. They could walk into any factory, warehouse, or store at any reasonable time to check things out. And most importantly, they could take samples for lab testing to see if what was on the label was what was actually in the bag.
So what could get you in trouble? The law laid out the major offenses pretty clearly: selling unregistered feed, lying on the label, tampering with the products, getting in an inspector's way, or using a fake registration number. All big no-nos.
The penalty for breaking these rules started with a minimum fine of 1,000 pesos. And while that might not sound like much today, back in 1956, that was a huge sum of money. We're talking about the equivalent of 250 days of minimum wage labor. It was a serious deterrent. And it wasn't just a financial hit. The law also packed the threat of jail time, up to 1 year and 1 day. This really shows you just how seriously the government took the issue of safe feed and fair business.
So when you put all the pieces together, the registration, the labels, the inspections, and the penalties, the purpose of this old law becomes crystal clear.
It was all designed to build a system of accountability that stretched from the factory all the way to the farm.
You know, for its time, this was a really forward-thinking law, but it does leave us with a big question today. In our modern world of complex global supply chains and all sorts of new technology, is a rule book that was written over 65 years ago still enough to keep our food chain safe? It's definitely something to think about.